I am happy to announce that now we have with us Dr. Harriet Fraad to talk about how the American culture of rugged individualism is impacting our ability to follow the CDC guidelines of self-isolation. Harriet is a mental health counselor and hypnotherapist in practice in New York City. She's been with us before to talk about how capitalism impacts our relationships. And today we'll ask her take on why it's so difficult for Americans to forego their personal freedoms for the health of their neighbors. Now, remind you that Harriet Fraad is also she is also the host of Capitalism Hits Home on the Democracy at Work network, where she talks about topics in which psychology and economics overlap. Harriet, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you, Juliana.
But I have to say, I'm so happy that we have Zoom in these times. If there was no Zoom, this would have been a much harder way to go, I believe.
Yes. And I've been thinking about that question. Why don't people cooperate? And I thought, well, of course not. I heard the comment from Florida where people are jamming in and getting high and having sex with each other. And
The old people? No offense.
well, they're saying these are the young people
Uh,
who
Sorry, I'm
growing up in a country in which the empire is dying, although we don't admit it. We have not won a war since World War II, although we did win in the tiny island of Grenada, about as big as Staten Island, and that's it.
hooray.
This civil war, we're
Great
just
work.
getting out of Afghanistan, having spent $1 trillion instead of giving people opportunities. And I think that what happens is, first of all, we are a country that pushes individualism. Our president, who got 214 million from his father, claims to have made it on his own. Young people see that that dream, and older people and middle-aged people see that that dream, that if you work really hard and postpone your pleasures, you can make it in this society, is over. Our president is the recipient of 214 million from his daddy, and he's not the best or the brightest and never has been, and he's the president. Our previous president was, as a friend of mine said, he had rice pudding between the ears.
Mhm.
He was practically retarded and couldn't even speak straight. He looks better than Trump, but that's it. And he got to be president because his father, and therefore, as an inheritor, he has billions of dollars.
Mm.
So that it's not a place where if you sacrifice and you work hard, you can actually get the American dream and have a stable job and a stable relationship and a life that you can feel proud of.
It was kind of that way for a while
It
on
was if
some
you were
level for
white.
some people.
Yes, if you were white and in a family headed by a male or a white male yourself, you got a family wage to support a family, and you could count on until the mid 70s that every generation would do better than yours.
Mm.
That if you were a blue collar worker, your kids could be white collar workers, that there was a sense of progress.
And
But
Harriet, we made the point yesterday that as a white collar working child of a blue collar worker, the exact dynamic that you're discussing, I am still having the same economic issues as my uh, parents. Will I be able to send my children to college? Will we be able to afford our health care? All of that is, we didn't make much progress here changing collar colors.
no, we actually devolved. We didn't make progress. We went backwards because what happened is in the 1970s, starting in the mid 70s, with sophisticated multinational communication systems, with computers, with robotics, the capitalists of our society were able to outsource millions of jobs to countries that had no ecological standards or weak ones, and where wages were below $1 an hour, or the highest wages at $3.26 an hour, and so that they could profit obscenely, come home and buy our politicians. After which people became much more hopeless, much less activated, much more engaged, because they felt money talks. Who am I?
Mm.
That this is I don't have a chance here. And they began to live for the moment. And therefore, if you're living for the moment, you say what that young man said on the beach in Florida. I don't know if I'll get the virus. I don't care if I'll get the virus. I'm having fun. Well, you start to live for the moment. And in this individualist culture, you don't feel like you will get ahead in life if you unite with others and fight.
Do you think that individualist culture can be synonymous with capitalist culture? It doesn't seem like capitalism and community mindedness could possibly exist hand in hand.
They don't. And also, the ideology of capitalism is if you work hard, if you hang in there, you can have a good life as long as you're white and male. Okay. That ideology persists, making a lot of people feel like they're failures if they haven't made it, even though the situation has changed. And no matter who you are, your children are, unless you're a multimillionaire or millionaire, a multimillionaire, your children are statistically much less likely to do better than you. In fact, 60% of adults are supporting, to some extent, their adult children. And so
Ugh.
you have the opposite happen. You have the children coming back home because they can't live. Also, you don't have the emotional security you used to that gave you this sense that I can discipline myself because I'm going to get something here.
Mhm.
Because the majority of marriages break down. The majority of people don't even get married in the first place because you get married because you expect you'll have a future together and they don't know if they have a future.
Mhm.
The biggest development of married couples is married couples without children because people can't afford the expenses.
Mhm.
And so the America of hope and connection, which is the opposite of isolation and just live to have a good time, doesn't exist.
We're going to be forced into connecting with each other. Even the disconnection from, as states start to crack down on people actually getting together, people are forced into their homes and forced to interact with their families. um, that could be very difficult. We have one of the first, when I announced you were coming on, one of the first questions that we got, even over an hour before you got here, I announced that you'd be coming. And a question came in from Lecton: what advice can we give to our friends? And I'm assuming this is a young person that are stuck in authoritarian households due to the quarantine.
Well, I think that's a great question. And what we can do is communicate with each other via the internet, via Zoom, via video chats, via anything, and give each other the strength to, first of all, name the enemy. This is an authoritarian household. And if they're adults, make it clear I don't accept this. Without rancor, if possible. You don't want to escalate things, but just say, I don't accept this. Thank you for your input, and then go on. Because
One
you
of
don't want to rile the beast, but you also do not want to let yourself be overwhelmed. You know, there's an Italian movie. I'm sorry, every time you get ready to talk, I cut
No,
you.
that's okay. You say wonderful things. So
There's a great Italian movie called Padre Padron, my father, my master, about a father who is trying to dominate his son, and the son is listening to music, and the father tells him to turn it off, and he won't. And the father takes his radio and submerges it in water in the sink, and he whistles the tune that was on the radio. And he's saying that no, you don't have to accept irrational authority. And what happens in the home is a lot of men who who think that their manhood depends on controlling the situation, when they're trapped at home, try to control their wives and children, which is why in this pandemic, child abuse rates have soared, shaken baby syndrome, or you shake the baby because it's annoying and it's crying until its brain turns to jelly. And either the baby dies or sometimes just becomes
Brain cells.
blind or loses some other sense from a shaken brain. Wife abuse has soared. And of course, we don't have separate and safe battered women's shelters.
Yeah,
For
you can't go there.
no.
Slayist78 says domestic abuse is up 30% in my state. This, I mean, so I myself am trapped in my house with my husband who used to go out to work and my daughter who used to be, you know, at play school and then coming home, and we're all sort of having to renegotiate our spots. And when people, there's like a small chasm of what's going on out in the world in our home. So our when people are frightened, say I'm the parent and I'm frightened, and so I'm watching the news and I'm making sure, and are we locked down, should we leave the city, how dangerous is it, all of these questions at rapid fire, because it's not like we were preparing for this for months, this was last week. And then your child who is small and doesn't know, or maybe, she's like, let's play dominoes, loud, nonstop. You're kind of like, could you stop? There's,
Right.
there has so and I liken this to what's happening out in the world. Those people who are staying on the beach are just like, we're gonna play the dominoes even if it gets you sick. And then you can see how authoritarian responses would rise in those cases, because the idea is, uh, we need we need to keep people safe. And here in New York City, you're allowed to go for a walk in the park. I went for a walk in the park. It was like a New York marathon, Harriet, going around the park. I went in, people were elbow to elbow. This was not 6 feet of space with jogging. And there were police cars there blaring things like, you need to stay this far apart, the quarantine will be enforced, etc. Very kind of, hair on the back of my neck. I didn't stay with the joggers. I just went
Mm,
and walked around in the woods, which you can do, people. You don't have to stay on the trail. Anyway, everyone's like, trail.
mm.
So, um, how do we, without the rise of authority, I mean, you can see the rise of authoritarianism happening in the state, and you can see it happening in the homes because people are afraid. And those in charge often don't have other skills to fall back on. What are your thoughts about that? The
Well,
parallels there.
what happens is that people don't feel in control. And those people who have to control things around them have only their families to control, which usually ends up in violence. And so, you also have people feeling imperiled because our leader thinks of nothing but his own profit and his PR and his electoral results,
Mhm.
which depend on enriching his buddies at our expense. Our governor has stepped up, Governor Cuomo, with different values to try to save us and to try to oppose the idea that Trump gave the development of testing and helping people to a private company, which will reap huge profits. And he refuses to force companies to make the masks we need and the gowns we need and the respirators we need, just as he disbanded the CDC's Committee on Pandemics and withdrew from the UN Committee on Pandemics. And didn't tell us when he knew in December
Yes.
this was coming because it would look bad.
Ugh.
So that people feel like they're terrified and in unsafe national hands. Although Cuomo is honest and forthright and rising to this occasion, our national leader is utterly failing us, which makes people more afraid. So, what I would suggest to people is they try to stay calm, they try to connect with whoever they can who's sane, and they quietly, quietly stand up for themselves and say, look, I know we're under stress. This is what I'm going to do, and walk out of the room.
And
if
I
you
think those
really
people
look
who
at
are
'em.
like, I'm going to assert my right to be on the beach might want to start considering that they are adding to, reasons that authoritarians can give to continue their authoritarianism. They're saying, look, these people aren't doing this. We're going to crack down. It's not just the spread of the disease that these beach people who don't seem to care about anyone but themselves are helping to spread. They are helping to spread authoritarianism.
They are, but their philosophy in life is grab the experience, grab what you can before it all disappears, and the hell with everybody else,
Mm.
which is what our president has as his ideology,
It's
which is what
hoarding.
they tell us.
It-
It's hoarding, it's also utter disregard, being just lost in your own sensations, trying to have a lot of sex, drink a lot.
Who would want to have sex during a pandemic? I mean, with a stranger on a beach. It seems like a good way to get
It is,
a
but it's
pandemic.
also a moment of sensation. I remember an elderly woman telling me how during World War II in Europe, where she was, everyone was having sex with everybody. They didn't know what would happen. They grabbed a moment of sensation and went with it to hold
I
on.
am like afraid of the death of my family members and children. It doesn't make me feel like, turned on. Maybe that's
No,
just me. I don't know.
no, it isn't. But you, first of all, you are a world citizen, you are a national citizen, you have a sense of being a part of things, you are in a strong family unit that protects one another. You are the exception in the United States.
Oh.
And these young people don't even know if they'll have a planet, no less a career.
Mhm.
And so they just want to grab the moment and have sensation before it all and they disappear. And they don't think about other people. Now,
Mhm.
that's not true of all of them. Young people are the ones behind planet extinction forces. They are more
Extinction Rebellion. Right. Right.
Extinction Rebellion, more like Greta Thunberg than they are by these people, like these people on the beach.
But I noticed the beach people get all the media.
Yes, they do, because it's sensationalizing.
And they're in their bikinis, which.
Of course, is a big excitement for some. Just like they cover Trump's idiotic stuff,
Ugh.
even though it's idiotic, rather than saying, of course, this isn't true, but the president says, get back to work, you won't get sick. Well, whatever, or you're all dispensable. Only 1 or 2% is dispensable. Now, if we could choose the 1% that was dispensable, I know what the mass of American would choose in terms of the 1%, but we won't get our choice.
We're
And
happy to give your questions to Harriet. So put them in the chat if you're watching on Facebook and also if you're watching on our Twitch channel. We were talking to Sasha Abramsky about the unprecedented stances some leaders are actually taking toward relief. For example, Mitt Romney, generally not a favorite, has come out in favor of a universal payment to all Americans. Do you think there is a chance that the pandemic could change American culture and how we relate to each other and our leaders in any kind of a lasting way?
it might, particularly if people use the internet to organize their voices. Because look, if we look at the countries where people are in strong socialist and sometimes communist or green connection, like the Netherlands, if you're laid off because of coronavirus, you get 90% of your salary from the government. No evictions, no rent backlogs, no utility backlogs. They won that. In Sweden, they won 80% salaries. That there is, where people join together and have a powerful voice, they can get change. And I think what happens is that for 150 years, between 1820 and the 1970s, if you were white and male or in a family led by a white male, every generation could do better than the one before. That's over. It was over by the late 70s. And we developed an individualist culture. You can make it if you really try. Whereas in Europe, people understood if they were going to get an improvement in their life, they had to act together.
Mm.
And they joined together in powerful socialist, communist, green connection.
Mhm.
And so that in those countries where they did that and they have a strong presence, they are getting benefits because if they don't, they'll be out of office.
Mhm.
Americans are just beginning to get organized because we've been dominated by an individualist ideology that as long as you're white and in a family headed by a male, you can do better.
Mm.
And that was when America was an overwhelmingly white country. Also, by 2050, the majority of young people in this country will be brown, non-white. And so that dream would be over about whiteness anyway. But this country is changing. Gender norms are changing, racial norms are changing. There's a big sort of fascistic backlash. Gay norms are changing. There is huge progress, but people have to act together rather than splinter off into the gay rights and the civil rights and the,
Mhm.
this power and that power. We are the majority. That's what we have. We do the work. That's what we
Harriet, Harriet, turning to sort of more personal matters, you are a psychotherapist. Have you? I just want to kind of get your sense of how people that you know are coping either with the isolation. There's a lot of ways I'd like to break it down. I know you yourself left the city, and a lot of people did leave the city, New York City. Um, can do you have any insight on how sort of the population above the 50-year-old or 60, what's the cutoff for you're definitely going to get it, 60, 70? What is that?
have.
How is that affecting the mental health of that particular population?
Well, what happens in a traumatic situation, and this is a traumatic situation in which the ordinary routines of your life are transformed, you have to stay home. You can't go here, you can't go there, you can't meet with friends. Your life is changed
Mm.
radically. If you fall and hurt yourself, if you go to the hospital, you're likely to get coronavirus there in
Yeah.
addition to your affliction. And so that the traumas and the terrible experiences that people have in the past that seemed like dust that had settled are kicked up. So people are tense, they're unhappy, they're more explosive, they have more trouble expressing their needs. Not that a lot of people are good at that anyway. And so they're in trouble and they feel abandoned because they have been at least by our president, they have been abandoned. It is a comfort that Cuomo and de Blasio are rising to this occasion so that some of our elected leaders are acting responsibly. But people are terrified and their symptoms become worse.
Mm.
And with isolation and lack of communication, all physical symptoms get worse. There's something called oxytocin, not anything you can buy. It's a biochemical produced in the brain, and it's produced through touch. So people who are used to either being physically close or giving each other hugs or holding hands or picking up their baby or even stroking their dog or even the touch that when you give someone money in the store, they give it back in your hand without a rubber glove, that's off. So one of those comforts is off. Humans are social animals. We always have been. They never find individuals alone in prehistoric caves
Mm.
because people lived in groups. They wouldn't have survived if they didn't. People are not the swiftest or the best at the strongest animals. They don't have the best eyesight. They don't have the best hearing. But what we have is an ability to cooperate and get something done together.
Mm.
So they could hunt big animals because they could work together,
Mhm.
making the big noise, driving the big animal into a big pit they dug together, and then dividing the meat. harvesting the seeds and berries and nuts, which women did, which were the basics of survival at that time. And without the together, people are much more frightened.
Dr. Fraad, I was in contact with a friend of mine who is in the age range where I mean, we just watched a video of a 50-year-old man saying that he got it, almost died, and what he went through. So, this idea of the age range is kind of misleading, but older folks are what kind of emotions are they experience? I'm assuming fear. That's what I've been hearing from friends of mine who are in that age group. And then there are those who are, I don't know, just like, oh, I guess we're old. It doesn't make sense to me that that would be the response. Um, are you hearing, what is the mental health challenges specific to the age group that is targeted by this pandemic?
Well, part of
We're
it
all isolated, but the elderly are generally isolated in the first place.
is to get over that isolation however you can. And if the biggest technology you can master is the telephone, get on the telephone.
Mhm.
Don't be more isolated than you have to. But also, for that population who has lived a long time and gone through either the Depression or World War II or other painful things, those experiences are kicked up.
Do you think it's important to, given the fact that those experiences are kicked up and then people's coping mechanisms, let's say denial? I have that happening in one of the older people in my family where they're not in New York City, they're in a place that hasn't had more than a few cases. And when we speak on the phone, that person is clearly in denial that her daughter, oops, I outed who it is in the middle of the epicenter of a pandemic. Just like everything's fine. What's on Wheel of Fortune? It's kind of the conversation. And, and I've noticed that kicks up my own feelings of like, hello, but I also realized that she does that. It was actually kind of a great healing time for me because I realized that coping mechanism of just kind of I'm not can't deal with that at all has been going on my whole life, and therefore I was like, oh, clearly she's worried, clearly she's just blocking it, and it wasn't that she didn't care for me, it's just literally she could not do it. And so it was kind of a great healing moment for me because all of the dominoes of like areas of feeling where I tried to go to her with something that was a hot button issue or something painful, and she was can't. They all just kind of went away, which was really a lovely moment for me, uh, in terms of healing within that relationship. And but I did decide, and I'm hoping this is the right thing, to not be like, Mom, I'm in the middle of a pandemic. I didn't try to break through her denial. I just said, okay, well, I'm glad Wheel of Fortune's going well for you, and I'll call you in another week. Stay inside, and she's living with a caregiver who is fully aware that she's not going out, and the caregiver's not going out, and they're all stocked up with food. So I feel a certain sense of safety, even though you could get it from a box being delivered to your house, apparently, or anything
Of
like
course you
that.
could. But
Yeah.
I think that one of the troubles is that if you don't talk it out and you don't admit things, you act it out. There's a scene in a Woody Allen film where the protagonist, Larry David, who happens to be in this, is being left. I mean, his much younger girlfriend says she's leaving him. And he says, that's okay. Then he runs to the window and hurls himself out. Um,
Oh.
because if you're not willing to talk it out, you're sure to act it out
Mhm.
because it's in there. Somewhere she knows there's a pandemic, unless she's completely demented, then she's off the hook on that one. But she knows there's a pandemic, and she probably wasn't demented her whole life and had this coping mechanism. But it means somewhere else in life, it's going to come out. Just like these men who are scared and try to get control can be violent to get violent control or control through violence over their families. Also, people become much more symptomatic. They
Yeah.
start developing colds, they think they have coronavirus. they come up with all sorts of hypochondriacal symptoms that act out their fear and their vulnerability that they can't admit. So when you can't admit things, but somewhere, you know, they come out elsewhere
Mhm.
and they will be acted out. And you're not with your mother, which is probably very lucky at this point, because yes,
Well, yeah,
there'll be a lot of acting out
yeah.
that's done.
I've started to eat a lot more cheese at night, I'm not gonna lie.
Well,
You gotta
obesity,
do what you gotta do, you know?
yeah, well, obesity is way up because people are eating their hearts out.
Mhm.
They want to give themselves some kind of nurturance, and that's food. And even though it's dangerous to the heart and everything else to be obese, which you sure don't look, but
Not yet. Give it a couple more
give it a
weeks.
couple more weeks.
Give
People
it
are drinking much more, and they don't have the kind of physical groups they used to have in 12-step programs like AA, where they could see one another. And there's comfort even in looking at one another, even
Although
knowing someone else is in the house. I feel it myself when I come home, there's my husband hunched over his desk working. I think, oh, the world is in order. There he is, even though I'm not interacting with him.
Mhm,
And I know better than interrupting him at that point. I
mhm,
still know he's there. And so when people aren't there, that's an added level of fear, the
mhm,
knowledge that you are not alone. And
mhm.
we have to remember that
I
in New
do
York,
I do wanna say that for anyone watching who needs this, AA meetings and, other 12-step group meetings, Al-Anon, Gamblers Anonymous, all Sex Addicts Anonymous, they're all on the internet now.
right,
You can
they
just
are.
go and you can go to a new you can be new, you can just watch if you've never been, or your particular group, I'm guessing that, is still online. So that was a very quick I think that community was knowing that they are in desperate, dire straits in terms of their own health and mental health, really organized very quickly to make sure their communities were available to each other, and I think that's fantastic. So
That's
just go
fantastic.
online and Google, you'll get it.
That's right. And yet, the proximity of the other person is also a healing thing. However, they have a lot in doing that because isolation is terrible for people. They can't allow themselves to be completely separated out from other people. I mean, they did find in this, a woman created a wonderful program, which was, of course, not reproduced, where she took over single room occupancy hotel and made very tiny little personal apartments and big communal spaces for elders. And they found that with watching movies together and playing games together and talking together, their Medicare bills plummeted. They went way down because people weren't sitting there thinking about their pain and making it worse. And in a place like that, you can have the chairs 12 feet apart while you watch a movie. You can do things where you have little microphones at each chair and people can communicate. And so I would say communicate as much as you can, be safe and communicate. Don't be utterly alone. That's dangerous. Hi, James.
Hi, I work with Juliana. I'm sitting in my living room in my pajamas. Apparently,
Good.
Juliana's internet went down thanks to the fact that 70 million extra people are sitting working from home. So,
Right.
yeah,
We're
I've been
communicating.
no, we've been listening in. I find all this fascinating. I was just typing into chat while you were discussing how people shouldn't be alone and depression creeps up, and people still need to be active in their social lives. And I've been telling people on Twitch, let's say you go to like a Friday happy hour, have a Zoom. Seriously, sit in your house, have a glass of wine with six
Right.
other people. Like, what do you think about people trying to do the exact same thing that they were doing, just virtually? Like, is that a good
I think it's a
exercise?
wonderful idea. It's a wonderful idea to communicate with other people. It's a wonderful idea to try to do the routines. If you did a workout before, do it on the internet. There's wonderful workouts on the internet. So you put your computer in front of you and you do what the teacher says, whether it's a yoga teacher or an exercise teacher or whatever it is, stretch classes, try to keep going as much as you were before, because you don't want to let yourself go into depression, because depression has enormous physical as well as mental pitfalls. People who are depress their own immune systems also and are much more vulnerable to disease.
Okay, so I have Juliana had been collecting some questions from people in chat, so let me run through them real quick here. Okay, so one of our viewers asked, what advice can you give for those with mental health disorders, especially those requiring proper medication and support, especially during a lockdown where maybe you can't get access to your full stack of medicines?
Well, as much as possible, the pharmacies are open. So if you can get your medication, get your medication. And there's a funny thing I saw: if you're happy and you know it, keep your meds, okay. So that's, if you're on medication and it works for you, keep it going. The pharmacies are open. But you need to communicate. You need to talk, get on a support group that's on the internet and talk about your problems and listen to others, which connects you to them. That's a very important thing, because without communication, people are lost. We really are lost. Even if you're deaf, have your sign language community on the internet. If you're blind, listen to your video community, your audio community, and not if you don't have your video community. I can't say it enough. Keep in touch, even if you can't touch one another physically, because we are social animals. Individualism is a perversion that can't exist. No one is a self-made man or woman. People come from other people's uteruses, where they were made through sperm and ovary, and then they're nurtured. And if they're not talked to and held, they die. It's called failure to thrive. Even children who are fed and changed regularly, they can't learn to sit up or lift their head. It's called a failure to thrive syndrome, because people need communication. Even at the very earliest stages, they need communication.
Ow, see,
So that
I was Ferberized as a child. I think everybody in the act.tv community will tell you how I turned out. So that sounds like extremely practical advice.
you should also talk to your audience about what Ferberized is.
So is the Ferber method, which is basically when a child's crying, you basically leave them alone. You don't acknowledge their crying. You let them, quote, cry it out. And then you're supposedly able to learn to adapt to being alone and self-sufficient quicker. And you end up becoming a very withdrawn person as you get into your single digits in your early teens, because that becomes like your default state.
That's right, because what happens is, if you cry continuously, and I do think parents should set their timer for 5 minutes, because sometimes a child's crying seems like it's happening forever when it's 1 minute. But then after 5 minutes, if you don't come in and pick up your child, the child learns that the universe is not a trustworthy place, that you will not get your needs met, and that you are isolated when you need connection. Now, even the Ferberists feel like, okay, after a while you pick up your kid and hold your child and feed your child. But the more isolation children are in, the less they're able to trust the world, because it doesn't come through for them. Children, and the least confidence they have, because children don't differentiate, infants don't differentiate who they are and who the outside world is. That's why if one baby starts to cry in a nursery, they all cry because they think it's them. I mean, they don't really know who they are and who other people are, so that they find it much harder to trust themselves with self-soothing and solutions. And so that method, which is no longer followed, thank goodness, is very damaging. And it's wonderful that you managed to make a life in spite of it.
I'm lucky. I've managed to surround myself with really good people, especially later in life. I mean, I'm fortunate because I got to be a fairly good judge of character, and over the years, I surrounded myself with good people that kind of do this instead of do this, and
Right.
you know,
That's
it's
critical.
yeah, but I'm with you about the whole like community, and that's why like I've been telling people, whether it's Twitch or on Facebook, like all of a sudden everywhere you see people posting on social media, if it's videos of I don't care, it's them in their apartment alone doing karaoke, but they're talking to people in the
Right.
chat, like. It's almost like a surrogate personal connection. Like even though it's virtual, it's still there, and I'm amazed at like how quickly it just sprang up everywhere. Like over the last week, which
Based on need. You know, Johan and then Hari, has a wonderful book called Lost Connections. And what it talks about the same thing, and how healing it is to be in a community, and how dangerous it is not to be in one. And you can be in an internet community as well as in a physical community. But community is crucial. And it's the opposite of a capitalist ideology, which is you see people, which you can see in Trump, as a vehicle for enriching yourself. And you don't care about them, you care about your profit. And no one can really succeed in a big business without saying, okay, how can I give people the least and get the most for myself? Because that's what capitalism is. You pay people less so you get more for yourself. Nobody is hired because and gets exactly what they produce for the person who hires them. Otherwise, that person would go out of business. It's based on profiting off of other people's labor and not thinking of them. So someone like Jeff Bezos can spend $500 million trying to get himself into outer space and not care that his warehouse workers are breaking down from having to lift things at a mile a minute, you know, uh, much faster actually, and under a pace and under conditions that are damaging, because he feels like I'm good. I've got more. I'm making more for me. And those other people are only digits in a profit calculus. They're not humans like him. And that's why you get a Trump and the people who surround him, who are indifferent to the suffering of other people, which is pathological, but capitalism encourages it. You know, to use nursery school language, capitalism isn't nice.
wow, so capitalism, narcissism, and power are a bad combination. I'm stunned.
Yes, that's right. Well, that whole ideology, which is wonderfully shown in a film by Costa Gavras called Capital, is grab it. For me, I'm winning. So no one likes me. Who cares? I'm winning. I'm getting more and more and more. And then occasionally I'm getting some sensation so that Bezos can abandon his partner of many years because he's found some new sex thing. You live for your own sensation, for your own fantasy. I'm going to the outer space, and you disregard the rest. Or like Bloomberg, who spent about $1 billion getting himself elected, but he's not, and he has 44 billion, so he could do it. However, he's not going to donate, 4 billion for sophisticated, healthy masks and gowns and respirators. No, he's getting himself elected. That's where his money is. And it's all about him. It's very different from connection and concern and community.
Oh wow, this is just well. Number one, you're making me feel very glad about digital community, but it's very harrowing thinking of all the things we think of Trump having somebody who's an actual professional in the field of understanding people's personalities, confirming our worst fears.
Exactly.
Oh,
I don't know what your listeners are commenting about, but we have to face that capitalism and particularly the vulture capitalism moment we're in now with the vast inequality. I should mention that in 1970, we were the most egalitarian, the most equal country in the whole Western world of the 30 advanced nations. Now we are the least of the 30, one of the very few without universal health care and universal paid quality child care. We are a backward nation on all the social services. And we are in the hands of capitalist predators. And that makes people nervous. And some people, like Cuomo, are really stepping up to the plate and trying to do the best for the mass of New Yorkers. But there are many who are profiteering. You know, there's a wonderful story that comes from Germany that illustrates this. There's a German company that was on the cusp of creating a vaccine to prevent the coronavirus, which would, of course, and could be given to everyone to prevent coronavirus. And they had one CEO in New York or in the United States and two in Germany. Trump and Pence approached the one in New York. They wanted to buy the vaccine when it came out for the exclusive use of Americans, because Trump would then have the selling rights, and also he'd look like a hero because he got the coronavirus for us. Well, what happened was they offered $1 billion, much more than that company would otherwise be worth, to get exclusive rights to that vaccine for Americans, given to Trump and Pence. What happened was that American CEO was fired. The two German CEOs said, no, when we develop this virus, it will be for the whole world, not for one nation. And one of the legislators in Germany who commended them said, there are limits to capitalism. In other words, there are limits to doing anything for your own profit, even creating disaster and illness for a mass of people. And so that's where we are. You know, the United States capitalism can't really cure this virus. Something has to change. And when we're in these times, as they were in Germany before Hitler, where inflation was so terrible that people had to bring a wheelbarrow to the grocery store to buy anything, and their lives were suddenly at risk, they went for the great authoritarian leader. They had been brought up in authoritarian families, then graduated on to authoritarian churches, and then to authoritarian education. And they believed you're bad if you don't just obey the great leader. And it destroyed their country and potentially destroyed the world as well. And so that the world will be divided into those people who believe something's wrong, I must be bad, I must obey the dominant authority, which a lot of Trump's voters and evangelicals believe, or no, this is our country, we're going to reclaim it, the way Bernie says, with different priorities of sharing for everybody, of community for everybody, because the current capitalist moment in the United States cannot cope. It really can't cope. And Trump is trying to figure out how to suppress the elections and how to stack the judicial and how to control things in a fascistic manner. So, I mean, whereas Bernie and many others are really thinking of everyone, so that when Trump wanted to give the airlines a big boost out of our money, Sarah Nelson, the head of the flight attendants and a very militant person, said there's no way anyone should pass anything that doesn't cover the flight attendants, the cleaners of the planes, the people who cook the food, the people who operate the mechanisms of these planes, the mechanics, the controllers on the ground,
the actual laborers who do
the actual
labor,
laborers
yes,
who make it possible.
Labor. Yes.
Labor.
Yes. It's both a noun and a verb. I like to remind people of this. Okay. Sorry, everything got so weird with Juliana's internet dropping. I'm trying to coordinate everything, and she's like, "Oh, you know Dr. Fraad's already over time." So real quick, where can we have people come and find you on the YouTubes?
That's a good idea. They can just go on. This is my podcast, Capitalism Hits Home, and it's on iTunes. It's on democracyatwork.info. It's on my website, Harriet, HARRIE1T, then my last name, FRAAD.com. My work is there. I'm also often on Economic Update with Richard Wolff, which can be found in many places.
I like the cut of that man's jib. I hear good things about him.
Yes, me too.
Okay. Harry, I appreciate you so much for coming by. I'm so sorry everything got crazy, but
I am very glad to be here, and you were a super host.
Well, thank you. I try. You know, we're cursed to live in interesting times.
Yes, and also you cooperated. You took over. You were in solidarity with Juliana and me, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's what we do. Dr. Harriet Fraad, everybody, thank you so much for coming by. And Juliana will tell everybody when you're going to be on again. So thank you for coming by. All right.
Bye.
Cheers.